everybody. Thanks for joining me. I just wanted to do a video here on some drum sounds that I got recently that were inspired by drummer and producer Aaron Sterling. If you haven't checked out Aaron's stuff, I highly suggest doing that. If you haven't checked out his latest sample pack, Denim and Dust, you should totally do that too. Because that's what these drum sounds are actually inspired by. I picked up this sample pack and really loved the open, dark, and earthy sounds that he got. He used calfskin heads, I believe, and brushes, and it just had a really nice vibe. And I thought as a cool experiment, it would be fun to try to see if I could come up with my own type of sound in this realm using my own equipment, mics, and skills to see if I could sort of come close to this for my own practice. So I'll play for you what I have, and then we can go in and look at the individual drums and mics and see what kind of processing was done on these. So in this session, you'll find, or we'll discover, that some of these mics are being utilized more than others, such as the room mics and overhead mics. It has a really ambient sound, so the close mics were only used for a bit of low end and punchiness. They weren't the main source of the sound. So let's dive in. Here are the overheads. So the overheads were a spaced pair of small diaphragm condenser mics. They were Neumann KM184s. As for processing, I didn't do a whole lot on them. I just high-passed them here. So those are the overhead mics. Let's move on to the mono overhead mic. So when I was recording these drums, I was using mostly room mics and overhead mics. It had a really wide sound, but I found that when listening back to Aaron's sounds, it had a bit more of a center image to it. So I decided to add a mono overhead mic, which is a ribbon mic. It was an Apex 210. And I found that adding this mic not only gave the drum set more of a center image, but since it's a ribbon mic, it's a figure eight, so it has the back side of the mic pointing up towards the ceiling. So it got some more of that good room vibe that we kind of want for this sound. So here's the mono overhead by itself. So for processing on this, again, we're high passing this mic. We don't need all that low end information in the mic because we're getting that from other mics. And then in the Slate virtual mix rack, there's an EQ here. We're adding a bit of top end back into this mic. This is a ribbon mic, so it is a little bit darker. So we are adding some presence back into it here. And then we're taking out some mid-range junk here. And we're also high passing it again here just to be safe. And some compression. Here's without the processing. So it's barely touching that compressor, but the EQ is doing quite a bit. So let's move on to the kick drum. So the kick drum I used for this was a 28-inch vintage Premier marching or concert bass drum. I did put a Remo fiber skin on the batter side of this kick drum, not only because Aaron used calfskin heads on his kit, it kind of brought it closer to that sound, but it also kind of dried out the really boomy characteristic of this drum. I actually stole another trick from Aaron Sterling, which I've seen him do, which is he takes a piece of fabric or like a towel or a rag and tapes it onto the bass drum where the beater hits. And I tried doing that with this drum and by using my hard felt beater and putting that piece of fabric on the where the beater hits. It gave the perfect amount of attack and took off the edge just enough so when the beater hit, you weren't getting a piercing beater sound. It was kind of a softer impact. The bass drum mic was used a Warm Audio 47 Junior, and there isn't a lot in this mix. There's just enough just to give the bass drum a little bit of low end, and I'll let you hear the bass drum mic by itself. And as for processing, there is a bit of a high pass here going on, and that's just to take out that really, really rumbly low end in this microphone. Again, this is a 28-inch bass drum, so there's a lot of air being moved, and the head's moving a lot, so there's a lot of low end that's not very focused, and it can get out of control really quickly, so I high passed it here, and then I gave it a bit of a bump where the fundamental low end tone is happening. And then took out some mid-low kind of junk here just to clean it up a little bit. And then in Slate Virtual Mix Rack, there's a mic pre with saturation happening and an EQ here. And the EQ, it looks like it's just taking a little bit of top end off and a little bit more mid-range and high passing a little bit. And this saturation, so this mic pre and EQ are adding a little bit of saturation and a little bit of thickness just based on the type of EQ it is. And it's just giving a little bit more low end girth to the bass drum. So here's with all the processing off, and then I'll turn it back on again. Moving on to the snare drum. The snare drum that was used was a 1967 Ludwig Superphonic, and I tried a few different drums, and this seemed to be the one that suited the sound the most. And the trick to this sound was actually in the snare wires themselves. I found that if I had the snares too loose, it sounded really rattly. If they were too tight, it didn't sustain enough. So the trick was trying to get them in that sweet spot. Here's the snare top mic. So as for processing on the snare top mic, by the way, it was a Shure SM57 on the snare top. And we're high passing, just getting out that low end information that we don't need. And then there was a bit of a ring in the snare drum, so I took that out here, and then just ducking out some of the mid-range muddiness and adding some presence back here in the top end. So here's what the snare sounds like without the processing. And with it on. So the next mic is the Snare Bottom mic, which is also a Shure SM57, and there's actually more bottom mic being used than top mic. So the only thing going on here is a bit of high passing and a bit of brightness being added in the top end here on the EQ. Probably the main sound of this drum kit was the room mics. The mic that I used was an AEA R88, which is a stereo ribbon mic. So here's what the room mics sound like. So for processing, just some high passing here. We don't need much low end in the room mics. It could get really boomy and muddy sounding, so we're high passing that. And then we have some EQ going on. There's a bit of high mid being added, some, again, low mid junk being taken out, and a little bit more high passing, and a bit of compression going on here too, not too much. The needle isn't even moving, just for a little bit of color and output gain, I think. So let's turn off all of these and hear it. And on. So yeah, big part of the sound are these room mics. The next mic is the knee mic, and this is a mic that was placed right over the hoop of the bass drum, pointing at the snare. So it was a vintage 635A microphone, which is an electro voice microphone that it works really well because it's a dynamic mic, but it's an omnidirectional mic. So it's picking up a little bit of everything on the kit, some snare drum, some bass drum. And again, like the mono overhead, it added some center presence back into the drum sound. So here's what the knee mic sounds like. So this mic really is adding a lot of dark, gritty character to the sound, and you're getting a lot of bass drum and that snare drum sustain out of it as well. I compressed it here. Kind of a key part to the sound is this microphone. As for processing, there's some low end being rolled off and some mid-range being taken out, and there's some brightness being added. This mic sounds sort of lo-fi-ish by itself, by nature, so adding some top end back in really helped add some presence back to this. And then in virtual mix rack, we have some high mids being added, some low mids being taken out, and some high passing. And then the key part to the sound is Soundtoys Devil Lock. It's got some compression, some saturation, and a little bit of EQ here and a mix knob built into it. And it really gave some grit and darkness to this sound. Let's check out this knee mic without the processing on. Here's without Devil Lock. And with it. So cool. It's adding a lot of darkness and grit to the sound, as well as adding some sustain. So let's hear the drums without that knee mic, and then we'll add it in. And with it. Let's go over to the reverb. So there's only one mic being sent to the reverb, which is a Lustrous Plates reverb by Slate, and it's our mono overhead. Let's hear the drum sound without that reverb. And with it. I don't know if Aaron used Reverb on his sample pack, but for this, I thought it worked and I liked it, so I went with it. So on the drum bus itself, we have a Slate tape plugin, virtual mix rack, some compression, this plugin called Murder Melodies, which is adding some space and saturation here. None of these other knobs are doing anything, just these two. And then a Burrier plugin, which is a saturation plugin. The output of this is adding actually a lot into our master channel. So I'm going to leave this plugin on, but the rest of them I'm going to turn off and gradually add, and you'll hear what they're adding. On the master bus, I added another virtual tape machine plugin, and then to finish off, to get some level and to overall put a little bit of a master on it, is the Ozone 9 plugin. This is actually an automatic algorithm by using the master assistant function here, so it's taking away some of the low end and adding some high end back here. And then there's a bit of dynamic EQ happening. I enjoy this Ozone 9 plugin because it kind of puts a final master and a level on everything just to make sure it's kind of on par with everything else that's out there. So there you go, guys. That's my take on Aaron Sterling's drum sound, and in particular his sound from the Denim and Dust sample pack. I hope you liked this video and hope you got something from it, and I hope it inspires you to try maybe some of these drum sounds in your own studio. And if you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.